Good morning, let's pair some McGrath palettes, and I actually also have two Lisa Eldridge like lip products that I purchased, but I think I'm going to show one of them tomorrow because I want to do like a full-on swatch party with all of my Lisa Eldridge lip glosses. I purchased the shade Decade. You might have already seen it actually on my Instagram. I posted on my Instagram stories swatches of both of the products that I picked up, but I'm going to leave Decade I think for tomorrow because then we can also just do like a separate lip gloss swatch party. Not that I have that many of them, but I would like to swatch all of the ones that I do have and we can also compare them. But the lipstick that I purchased, the second product, is the Luxuriously Lucent in the shade Kitten Mischief, and I had been lusting after this shade for the longest time. Obviously as a crazy cat lady because of the name of this lipstick, but also it always looked like the perfect peachy nude. However, the lip swatches on Lisa Eldridge's website can sometimes be so incredibly misleading, and based on how people were describing this lipstick, on some people it tends to pull a little bit more pink, and on others it tends to pull a little bit more like caramel peach. And I wasn't really looking for a pink leaning nude, I was looking for a peach leaning nude. I'm just going to start doing my makeup so that we're not here for 3 hours. But I had been lusting after Kitten Mischief for years at this point, ever since it was released. And another factor that has come into play is that now I know the Luxuriously Lucent formula very well. I think Kitten Mischief was released quite some time ago. It was one of the first maybe to be released, I can't really recall. But at the time I wasn't really completely sure about how I will feel about the Luxuriously Lucent formula, how it would fit in my, you know, makeup routine, whether I will get a lot of use out of the lucents that I have purchased in the meantime. But I do get a lot of use out of them. I use them quite a bit actually, and I really love that formula. So I decided to finally take the plunge, the risk that this lipstick is not going to be exactly what I wanted it to be. Based on the swatch I did yesterday evening, which granted was in artificial lighting in the evening, it did look like a beautiful caramel peach nude, like a really light peach nude. So I am very excited to see it now in broad daylight. So, you know, step number one will be that it's the color that I'm hoping for it to be, which is a peachy nude. And the second test this lipstick needs to pass is that it doesn't make the crusty white line in the inner rim of my lips, because it is quite light. I did swatch it against other like sort of peachy nudes that I have in my collection, and we can do that also later on when I'm putting on the lipstick. But I had the feeling that it is quite light, so I'm really hoping that it doesn't make the crusty white line, because I would be so sad. Anyway, putting on a bunch of makeup, nothing new here. Still trying to finish up my MAC 24 Hour Extend Eye Base. However, I did think in the end that it would be a smart idea to compare the MAC primer to the Inglot primer, now that I have both of them and I can actually see how they perform using one on one day and the next day the other. And honestly, I was really pleased with the Inglot eyeshadow primer because it has a really pleasant texture, it goes on the lids really well, and in my opinion it performs just as well in terms of like how eyeshadows apply over it as the MAC primer. And I prefer the packaging because it has a very thin nozzle where the product comes out from. With the MAC packaging I always had the issue that I couldn't really quite dispense small amount of product. It was either too little or too much. And I feel like that's maybe one of the main reasons I was experiencing such inconsistency issues. But I think the inconsistency issues are not just related to the squeezy tube, because I've had experience with the squeezy tube for years, and the last like year or two has been the first time that I thought this formula behaves strange. So I don't think it's just to be attributed to that. But with that said, I find the packaging of the Inglot one, let me just show you the Inglot one so you can see what I'm talking about. I prefer the packaging of the Inglot one much better. It looks like this. And my eyeshadows stayed on beautifully all day long. So the primer also performed really well. So overall I'm quite happy. I look forward to starting to use it on a regular basis. And I think it might become my new favorite eyeshadow primer, and like I said, the most affordable out of the three. Although I said that, but then I never really looked at how much product you're getting with the Inglot primer, and how much product is there actually in the original MAC primer. I do have the feeling that you get more with the MAC eyeshadow primer. I unfortunately threw out already the squeezy tube packaging that I have from that primer, but I want to say you get 12 mils, whereas with the Inglot one you get 10 mils. So it's possible that when push comes to shove, comparing the prices are not going to be all that different, although the MAC primer has become like ridiculously expensive. I want to say the price of that primer before discount is 23 euros or something of the sorts, and I want to say the Inglot one was something in the ballpark of 10 to 12 euros. I bought it like a year ago, so with inflation I'm not really sure how much that primer costs these days, but at least when I bought it, it was the cheapest out of the three, because I also have the Urban Decay primer potion. I've used that one in the past, so I kind of have an idea that it performs really well. Oh, I'm taking the Chanel Complexion Water Touch foundation, by the way, because I've been doing really well with my Pat McGrath primer. You can see that the little marking here has gone down significantly, and I think I could get a bit more use out of this before the true spring and summer months hit. But I have the attention span of a goldfish, and I really like to use different products. When I use the same base product for a while, I get really bored with that. So I really wanted to switch it up, and I went back to my Complexion Touch yesterday, and I was like, whoa, I really like how this looks on my skin. Especially like once it wears throughout the day, I think it wears really beautifully and it sits really nicely on the skin. Products last really well on it, so I thought, let's bust that one out again. And the Complexion Touch really gives you a very like wide range of coverage that you can achieve with. You can go for something extremely lightweight. It's what I'm doing right now, because I prefer somewhat lighter coverage for my foundations. Or you can go a bit more heavy-handed and achieve what I would call medium coverage, but don't take my words for granted, because coverage is another one where people have very different understandings of the meaning of that term. So, you know, I think this is light, can be built up to medium coverage, but to other people this may never be a medium or even like full coverage. Like, I would even call this medium to full coverage for my standards, but I'm pretty sure other people would laugh in my face. I'm going to pair the Chanel Water Fresh Complexion Touch with the, excuse me, with the Gucci finishing powder. Love, love, love this powder, love, love, love this packaging. Let's stick with Gucci also for bronzer. I'm going to take my, I don't know how this is called, bronzing powder in the shade 03. And I actually wanted to repeat on my cheeks a little bit what I did yesterday. Well, not for bronzer, but for blush and highlighter, because I really enjoyed the combination. And I wanted to make an additional comment about the blush, because it is a product that I mentioned in my monthly roundup and empties. And I get the feeling I might have given you the wrong impression that I don't really like this product as much. But in fact, I quite like the product. I just was having a little bit of blush fatigue, and I needed to get over that fatigue in order to really appreciate that blush. So the blush in question is the Cheeky Posh from Victoria Beckham, a gorgeous like cinnamony toasty color that I mentioned in my, well, I'm just going to apply a little bit like this on the back of my hand and use a brush to stipple it on. I find that the easiest way to apply this specific blush. But I mentioned in my roundup and empties that I was a bit lukewarm about it, and I didn't want to give you the impression that I think something's wrong with the quality of this blush, because the quality of this blush actually is really good. It's a beautiful natural formula, and it does last really well throughout the day for a cream product. I mean, cream products obviously will have somewhat shorter longevity compared to powder products, but yesterday I had a really long day at work, I was really busy, and at the end of the day this blush was still on, which I found honestly rather impressive. So I wanted to come back, use it on camera, and mention that I do actually really like both the formula and the color. I'm going to pair this with the Suku Melting Highlighter in the shade 101 for two reasons. First of all, because I put the two together yesterday and I thought the colors matched so well that, you know, you don't want to mess with a winning combo. And the second reason is that I wanted to once again express disappointment that Suku is discontinuing the melting powder formula. There's some sort of like a raw ingredient shortage issue, due to which they need to discontinue this formula. So this whole line of melting powder blushes and highlighters will be unfortunately slowly phased out. Now, I did get a message from them the other day on Instagram, so let me read you the message, because it seems like the formula will not disappear overnight. They said that they will continue with the line until the end of the year, and hoping there will be a good replacement. So hopefully they just find an ingredient that works just as well as the one that cannot be found anymore, and they bring back the formula and it performs just as well. But it's a bummer. And also for those of you specifically who are, I think, in Europe, it's a bigger bummer, because Suku was already difficult to get a hold of as it is, and these melting powder blushes have been going in and out of stock on Cult Beauty, which is the only place I can think of where they sell Suku. I'm going to apply a little bit of Fix Plus here with my sponge to melt all the products on my face. And one of you mentioned on Instagram that they're basically all sold out on Cult Beauty. I haven't really looked myself, but based on this message that they're not going to actually discontinue the line like tomorrow, and you still have some time, perhaps they will restock some of the shades on Cult Beauty, so just keep your eyes peeled if you wanted to really try this formula. But I also wanted to mention, I don't think you should go out of your way and like spend a ton of money just to try this formula. It's a really good formula, but I think there are other equally beautiful formulas out there that are more easily available on the European market. They're not going to be quite the same, but they're easier to get, they're not going to cost you your right kidney. And you know, if you're lucky and you can score one of the shades on Cult Beauty eventually, for sure give it a try. But I would not go out of my way to try and get one of these just for the sake of trying, because they're being discontinued. You never know what better comes along in the next year. Maybe Pat McGrath is going to release cream blushes and they're going to be phenomenal, so just saying. Okie doke, I have zoomed you in and we're going to start on the eye look now. So for the eye look, and as you have already seen on the thumbnail, I'm pulling out my beloved Sublime palette here, because I feel like I haven't done anything with Sublime on and off camera in a while. I think I used it recently off camera, but even so, I haven't really used it much recently, and I wanted to dip back into it. Now, a little spoiler alert for my ranking that's going to come at this point of this year, updated ranking of my Pat McGrath palettes. I don't think this palette is going to be #1 anymore. She has a special place in my heart, but I think in order to be fair, I will have to be honest, I don't think she's going to be #1 anymore for a variety of reasons. But anyway, let me tell you what I'm going to do for the look. So I want to use this shade here, one of the like more satiny shades, to apply basically all over my lid, blend it through the crease, and then over top of that I'm going to apply one of the two contenders for my favorite eyeshadow in this palette, which is the shade VR Nectar here. One of the most beautiful VR shades, in my opinion, in Pat's collection. And I am going to apply a nice little pop of green in my inner corner, because this shade, I don't know whether you can tell, if I shift it like this a little bit in the light, oh, maybe you can see it here in the mirror, has a little bit of a lime green shift on it. So I figured it might be fun to put a little pop of lime green here from the Divine Droid Quint in the inner corner of the eye. And now that I've opened this palette and I'm looking at this bronzy brown shade that I want to apply all over my lid, I'm thinking, should we do a little comparison swatch here of Ultra Suede Brown versus that bronzy brown shade? I don't think they will be the same. The one from the Sublime palette looks like it's a lot of a lighter shade, but perhaps they're similar enough that it will turn out you already have a very similar shade in your collection. So this is Ultra Suede Brown and this is the shade from Sublime. Yes, I think Ultra Suede Brown has more depth to it, but let's give them a swatch and see what happens. Oh, the one in the Sublime palette has such a sublime formula to it. It's been almost 5 years since I bought that eyeshadow palette, and this eyeshadow is still creamy and blends out beautifully. Okay, they're not dupes of each other in the sense that they're the same shade, but I would say this is just a somewhat lighter version of this eyeshadow. So if you were sad that you can't get Ultra Suede Brown anymore, but you happen to have the Sublime palette, I think they might, you know, create a similar effect on the eye. I'm not saying it will be the same, but it will be similar enough for you to not be too sad about it. Alright, I'm going to grab my jumbo blender if I can find it. oh yeah, here it is, from Sonia G. So it's this brush, and this is usually my favorite kind of brush to apply one and done type of eyeshadows, because I can cover a big area with it and I can also blend out. So I'm just going to pack this shade all over my lids. And then what I will usually do is bring it slightly here into the crease. And from this point onwards, I'm going to clean off my brush a bit on the microfiber cloth that I have next to me. And I'm going to start blending it up. I don't want to have too much product when I start blending upwards, because I don't want to look too dramatic. So this specific formula is not one that she really features much in her palettes anymore. It's a somewhat older formula from her, and I don't know what to say about it. On the one hand, I love her metallic, shimmery, glittery eyeshadows, so I will take more of those any day. But at the same time, these satin, you know, metallic shimmers from her that are very subtle in terms of their sheen are just such a delight to work with, and can really double almost as a matte eyeshadow. You can really, they're just so versatile. You can do whatever you please with them, and I don't know. I'm really conflicted about it, because at the same time, if I would have to sacrifice a spot in a Mothership palette for one of these satin shades, I'd be like, no, give me a glittery metallic. Is anyone here watching The Last of Us? It's one of those really hyped new shows. And there are two reasons that I started watching it. First of all, because my husband is a gamer, and when I started talking about The Last of Us, he was like, oh, do you know this is based on a really awesome game? And I was like, of course not. I don't have a single gamer bone in my body. And I think our orange friend is visiting. You will have to excuse me for a second. Yes, he was visiting, and not only was he visiting, he was trying to get into my lunch. Into the Ziploc bag where I have my sandwich. He's so desperate. Sorry for the diversion from the story about The Last of Us, but I need to tell you this story. I'm going to take a little bit of NYX glitter glue, by the way. He comes and he literally trashes both our trash and our home. He tries to get into the trash bins outside to see what he can score. And he also comes, and I have this little like container where I keep organic trash before I dump it into the big container outside. And the other day I put a piece of loaf in it that was really old, like a bread loaf. And then before I went to work and I was closing the lid of that thing, I was like, should I like lock it real tight in case he comes? I was like, no, he's not going to get into that box. He did, my friends, he did. The bread loaf was missing and the box was on the floor with the rest of the contents spilled all over it. And I just caught him trying to get into my Ziploc bag with my sandwich. He's very naughty. Anyway, going back to the makeup and my story about The Last of Us. So then my husband said that I am not allowed to watch The Last of Us, the TV show, before I have tried playing the video game. Why am I putting this with a brush? I'm going in straight into my fingers because I want this eyeshadow to be very intense. So then he made me play a little bit of the game, and like I said, not a gamer bone in my body, but I really liked it. I played for about 20 minutes or so, and I started watching the show. And I'm expecting that fans of the game will be really pleased with the game, at least based on what I saw in the first half of the first episode. I didn't like play the game past that point, so I can't really tell. But the whole first part of the first episode was like one-on-one what happens in the game. Even like dialogue was taken out of the game. So they stuck really close to the source material. The second reason I really wanted to watch it is because I have become quite the big fan of Pedro Pascal, who is one of the leads in this TV show. I'm going to give that just a light blend here through the crease. And then I'm going to go into the Divine Droid quad, and I'm going to take a little bit of this beautiful lime green shade to pop in the inner corners of my eyes. I kind of became a fan of him after The Mandalorian, and ironically, you don't really see his face in The Mandalorian. He's always under the mask. I think for like about 99.99% of the show. There was one episode, I think, where against his will they took off his mask, but for the rest you will actually not see Pedro Pascal's face. But he has such like a soothing, fantastic voice, and he just seems like such a nice person. I don't know if you watch SNL, but he recently hosted SNL, and honestly some of the skits that he did are my current like recent favorites from SNL. He specifically had one skit that I highly recommend watching, and if I don't forget I'm going to link in my description box, where he was like basically waking up from a coma, and his wife was there, his sister was there, the husband of the sister was there as well, and then he wakes up sort of like a different person with a completely different accent, and he just nailed it. He was hilarious in that skit, so I highly recommend watching it. FYI, I'm going to very simply complete the look now by taking this shadow again and popping it all over my like lower lashes. But yeah, so I've watched 2 episodes from The Last of Us. The episodes are quite long, so on a regular work evening I can't really go through more than 1 or 2. Like the first episode was a full-on feature film of 1.5 hours. Yesterday I watched episode 2, and I want to say that one was maybe only an hour. But anyway, it seems like it's a really good show. I'm really enjoying it so far, so I can only highly recommend it. And it has some really like interesting and cool scientific facts thrown in there about fungi that I never really thought about very deeply. And also that can actually happen in nature. Like what happens to the victims, like the human victims in the show, right now is not possible for that kind of transfer between fungi and human, but fungi can actually do that to ants. If you Google what happens to ants who have this like cordyceps fungal infection, they literally look like their bodies are invaded by that fungus, and the little like fruiting spory things coming out of them, that's a real thing. That's really scary. Anyway, I think actually I'm done with the looks. I'm going to apply some mascara, and I'll be back to apply Kitten Mischief together with you. Shall we try Kitten Mischief now? I'm very curious how that's going to look like in daylight. So this is one very thin coat. Just to remind everyone, the luxuriously lucent formula is one that can be built up. It's like a buildable lip balm with a tint to it, so you can keep it very toned down, or you can build it up to have quite a nice glossy sheen on it, but also a bit more pigmentation out of whichever color you have. And once they start to wear down, you basically are left with like a stain of whichever color you had on. So I'm going to apply an additional layer now. Overall, I do think the color very much stays in the realm of like a peachy nude. I can see hints of pink, but it's once again one of those like beautifully balanced colors that is going to probably pull slightly differently depending on what kind of like products you're surrounding it with. Today I have a lot of like peachy pinks on my eyes and on my cheeks, and I think it just complements both of these really well. Now I want to quickly compare to some other peachy nudes, like only 2 peachy nudes that I have in my collection, just for a reference. So let's swatch Kitten Mischief right here, so that you can also see a little bit on a swatch how this lipstick looks like. And then I'm going to swatch the lipsticks that I thought would be the most like similar in my collection, starting with one of the most obvious choices, which is Negligee from Pat McGrath. Negligee is also in like a creamy formula, but it is, I think, a bit more pigmented. It's not meant to be like a buildable lip balm. The one from Pat is definitely darker and less bright. This is quite bright, and you can see clearly, I think, when compared to the somewhat pinker tones of Kitten Mischief. Then another one that I figured might be quite similar is the shade Wellis and Tweed from H&M. It's one of their cream lipsticks, so in terms of formula all of these are quite similar to each other. But again, I think the tone of this is much deeper. although you can see those little like hints of pink in here as well. They are in the same color family for sure, but I think Kitten Mischief certainly is the lightest of them all, which is interesting because I always thought like wellies and tweed and negligee were already bordering my comfort zone in terms of nudes. I don't like nudes that are too light. Last but not least, we have the shade Fuel from Urban Decay. So I'm going to swatch that one right here. Oh, interesting. You can see that Fuel is in fact peachier in tone compared to Kitten Mischief, because there is more pink in Kitten Mischief compared to all of these three shades here. This one is an actual peachy nude, and this is like a peachy pink nude, in fact. So this was quite interesting. I hope that you found it interesting as well. I will report back on how Kitten Mischief wore throughout the day, probably when I post my makeup later on Instagram. But for the time being, I'm hoping that you enjoyed this look and all of the chatty random ramblings as usual. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought about this look, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!